Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to tell you about a aircraft called the SAAB-2000. My committee and I had a chance to fly this back in June of 1994, and if you're one of my U.S. viewers, you're probably going, SAAB-2000? What's that? I've never heard of that thing. If you're European, you probably know this. Well, there's an interesting history about this aircraft. It had two main reasons for failing in the U.S. market, and I'll get into that. And also, I'm going to do a little side note about the ship called the Vasa. All right, here we go. So here's the aircraft, the SAAB-2000. I'll tell you about the interior. It's got some really neat aspects to it and some interesting aspects about our flight evaluation of this aircraft that I'm going to point out. It looks like a little MD-11 as far as the cockpit is considered. Very, very nicely built aircraft. My committee made a lot of trips to Linköping, Sweden, where the Saab factory is located. We flew the Saab 340 and also the 2000. And back in one of our initial visits to Sweden, we had a chance on the way in. Of course, you have to go into Stockholm before you can go down to Linköping. So we stopped, and there was this museum that had just opened. It's the Vasa Museum. Now, this is a real tribute to engineering versus politics. The King of Sweden had this ship being built, and he had 2 rows of guns. Well, there was another king who was having a ship built, and he had 3 rows of guns, 3 decks of stacked guns. And the Swedish king said, I want 3 decks. And the engineers said, well, we're too late in the design. It would be too top heavy, and it would have a great risk of capsizing. King says, I don't care. I want 3 rows of guns. So in 1628, on its maiden voyage with a lot of sailors and their families on board, it sailed out of the harbor and promptly rolled over and capsized. And I believe a number of people were drowned. And it laid on the bottom for, I think, about 400 years or so before they finally brought it up and finally restored it. And we got to see it the second day the museum was open. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to bring somebody along. If we're going to evaluate an aircraft, especially a derivative type of aircraft, I like to bring somebody along who's familiar with it. And I brought along Brian. Brian was a captain for Simmons. He had flown the 340, and the SAAB-2000 was kind of a stretch 340, let's put it that way, with a bunch of nice enhancements. But I wanted somebody with that sort of background to get their input. Interesting thing is, Brian did not have a flight test background. He had the background of flying nice and smoothly, not doing a lot of flight test maneuvers, which led to an interesting stop on the way back between the factory and our hotel, where he got rid of his lunch next to a bridge in Sweden. Anyway, Brian, I'm sorry. I just had to tell that tale. But let me tell you about one of the other guys in our committee. And that's Jack Jarvis. Jack, unfortunately, was a heavy smoker, and he passed away way too early. I just hate to say that, but Jack was a good guy. He was a fun guy. He was my turboprop guy, and you can see the sense of humor here. I wanted to get a picture detailing how you would hand prop the 4,000 horsepower shaft horsepower engine here in case you needed to hand prop it. So Jack's a good has a good sense of humor and went along with the joke here. Really good guy, and we lost him. We lost him way too early. But he was my turboprop guy. Like I said, I didn't have much turboprop experience. And, of course, that became apparent not on this aircraft, but when I was flying the Dash 8-400. And I had a little bit extra speed coming into landing. And I pulled the props all the way into idle, or what turboprop guys call beta. And the blades go flat. Well, that's like having huge speed brakes out there. And I just heard Jack in the jumpsuit go like that, because he knew what was going to happen. But unfortunately, I was a little fast on the airspeed, and that cushioned the landing, which would otherwise been, if I'd have been right on speed, I'd dumped the thing in. But anyway, okay, that's my second digression. I haven't even hardly started this thing. Well, anyway, we're up there. We get to walk around. I've got my various committee members there. I brought, like I said, Jack Jarvis. I brought Joe Kohler, who was one of my committee members from Northwest. He was a 747 pilot. Kenny Kalalea was my staff engineer. He replaced Bob Hall, who had been my early engineer for a long time. And, of course, Brian Boat, as I mentioned here. Now, all these manufacturers provide you with a nice little marketing book that gives you all sorts of details. It's to us, the committee, that helps get a good background on the aircraft. It goes through all sorts of systems, information, etc. And it also is good, of course, for the customers. It just gives you an overall picture of the aircraft, is very informative, and is a very nice marketing tool. And I still have this book, of course. That's why I can give you excerpts from it, and it's one of the many numerous bins full of books that I still have in my possession, and the kids are going to hate me when I pass away, but they can put it in a dumpster. Anyway, it's a very nice reference for the aircraft. And being my background at as an electrical engineer, and I was a lead engineer in the microwave technology group, and I actually was sent to Boeing Vertol in Philadelphia to place all the antennas on the Osprey, the V-22. I spent a week there just doing that. So I always get a kick out of where everybody puts all the antennas. And amazingly, you think you've got a lot of area on some of these aircraft. But I had to put I'm digressing here for a third time. I had to put a SATCOM radome on a KC-135, a 707. That's a big airplane. Well, this was an EC-135, military version. And to place this about 2-foot radome on the top of the 707 KC-135, where it have good sight of the sky, stuff like that, I had to move 2 other antennas. It's amazing how crowded some of this real estate on aircraft can get to be for antennas. But okay, moving along here. Here is a diagram of the cockpit in the SAAB-2000, and this was a very cool cockpit. It's just like a little MD-11. I kind of related it to. It had the same basic layout, and these were CRTs. This was back when we were using cathode ray tubes. We haven't got the liquid crystal displays. And an interesting part about that, and why it's important to have pilots involved in even the early development, we would go to Honeywell and visit them, and they were working on some of the early liquid crystal displays. And so I'm setting in the mock-up cockpit, looking at the displays, and I'm looking at my display in the front, and I turn and I look at the co-pilot's display. Well, that, and those of you familiar with early LCD displays know that off-viewing axis angle could be really limited on some of the early ones. I mean, that's kind of nice for privacy, but when I'm looking over to see what my co-pilot is displaying, and I see nothing because they haven't done, I think it's called super twist in the LCDs, because now with the LCD displays, the captain can see the co-pilot can see the captain. That's what you want. But back then, I look over there and I couldn't see the co-pilot's instruments. And I said to the engineer, he says, I can't see my co-pilot's instruments. And he goes, well, you don't need to. You got your instruments. And I go, no. I need to be able to see both, to see if there's any differences. What if I lose mine? I can glance over at his and I immediately have attitude indicator and navigation. Had not occurred to the engineers that cross cockpit viewing was an important function. So that's kind of interesting. That's why you need pilots in all aspects of aircraft system design. All right, here is a picture of the SAAB-2000. Very nice display, very advanced aircraft for its time back then. This was the time when the aircraft were coming on into the glass cockpit type of technology. So the advances were coming, and this was really a beautiful layout. And this is a diagram about how cockpit visibility through windows should be. There's the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers is the original thing, but most people like to call it Society of Aerospace Engineers because they're involved with setting a lot of standards and or recommendations. You know how the FAA works. You can they'll do rules and stuff, but there's other methods of compliance. Well, okay, this is what you should be able to see from an eye position point, left side, right side, captain, co-pilot sort of thing. And They put the window diagram there to show that for the most part they exceed it. So you've got to have we're not sitting in a fighter with a nice canopy where you can see forever. You're going to have posts and stuff like that. So you do a pretty good job of making it. And then, of course, part of the overall review is we're looking at various systems design, and they give us the full layout, and we get to talk about it. And you can look at the electrical system. You can look at the AC system. And then we have a look at the DC system and talk about various aspects of it. Now here's one of the things that got the SAAB-2000 in trouble, and I'll talk about this when I talk about the actual flight evaluation. But you see, maximum operating Mach number, 0.62. Well, okay, that's not too bad, rightly, but they would like to fly this thing up to 310. And they would fly it up to 310 at 180 knots. And I'm going, I mean, it had great climb performance, but in our U.S. system, it was bad enough with the early 737s, which we used to call the Boeing speed bump, sitting there, doing 7.2 and stuff like that when everybody else wanted to go fast. But you put a 0.62 speed bump up at 310, and there will be a lot of unhappy people. And basically, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get up there. And so the whole design philosophy of all your efficiency at high altitude and stuff is not going to be realized because you're not going to be able to fly there. And there's the other aspects of various speed limitations and stuff like that. The max operating speed of 250 knots at or below 10 and 270 at or above 10. So it's not a fast aircraft. All right, so here's the cross-section drawing of the SAAB-2000. It's the same cross-section as the SAAB-340. And of course, if you're a good-sized person like me who's 6'1", that's a pretty tight fit. So it's basically a SAAB-340 cross-section, but they lengthened the entire aircraft 23 feet to accommodate a higher passenger load. All right, so here I am in the magazine, famous again for my flight review article. This was back in a time when the magazine did a lot more direct pilot type of interesting stories related to flying and stuff, not just union activities as such. And I'm still doing fairly well here. I've got top billing in my article in the front there, but this is back in the time when I published a lot of these. And of course, if you're a pilot of the last 20 years, you're going, I haven't seen any flight evaluations in the ALPA magazine. And yeah, they stopped doing them. The committee stopped doing them, and I have another little video about the rise and the fall of the new aircraft committee. But let's talk about the flight evaluation itself. All right, so let's talk about the SAAB-2000 flight control system. They basically wanted to have a manual flight control system. That, of course, makes life simpler. So the ailerons were manual, and they weren't too bad. They got a little stiff at higher speeds, which you would expect when you don't have hydraulic power or hydraulic boost on the ailerons, but that was all acceptable. But they were going to go with a powered elevator, and right away in flight test they got into a lot of problems with that. So they had to develop what they called Power Elevator Control System, PECS, the abbreviation for that. They found a lot of problems with high-speed static stability, high elevator takeoff and landing forces, maneuver stability, flap transient forces. When you put the flaps down, you don't want it like a Cessna 310 where you just go to 15 degrees flaps and it balloons you 100 feet, and you have to really run the trim. So they wanted, you don't want that. That's unacceptable flight characteristics for a transport aircraft like this. They also had some issues with high-speed vibration and interfacing the autopilot. So the CG range on this aircraft was supposed to be 5 to 42% MAC, but we were limited to 15 to 35. The VMO was supposed to be 270, but they had to limit it to 250 because of the issues. Landing flaps were supposed to be 35 degrees. They had to limit them to 20 degrees. but the PEX should solve all these problems. Basically, the SAAB-2000 is a 15% upscale of the SAAB-340. Like I said, it's the same diameter fuselage. It's 23 feet longer. Now, maximum takeoff weight is 48,500 pounds, and it's powered by two Ellison GMA 2100 engines with a normal takeoff rating of 3,738 shaft horsepower. So these are good size engines, and this is how the turboprop market was developing. These aircraft on a short stage length, like 400 miles or less, are more efficient than jet aircraft. However, and I'll tell you about this when I talk about the Dornier 328 prop and jet, which I got to fly both of those. People don't like prop airplanes. They think they're dangerous. Oh my gosh, it's got propellers. They must be horrible pilots and stuff like that. Well, of course, that's a totally false assumption. But you know how fickle passengers can be. So. It was always a hard sell, but there was a class of turboprops where they were coming with higher passenger loads and that, and of course they had these higher powered engines. Now, this also had an automatic power reserve system, which you could use when you had an engine failure, and that would bring it up to 4,152 shaft horsepower, a 110% total power rating, a 10% obviously increase above the normal setting. And like I mentioned, this was a 0.6 Mach at a 310, and I said to the guys, I said, no, that's not going to work in the United States. That's just not going to work. And that was one of the things that killed him. But interestingly enough, that wasn't what really killed him. What killed him was the exchange rate with the guilder compared to the dollar, and the aircraft was just not cost effective to produce. So that was probably the major issue and why you never saw it over in this country. It just was not an economical competitor. Now, I started out the evaluation in the left seat, went through the engine start and taxi out, and if you want more details and you want to read the full article, I'm providing a PDF file in the comments that you can click on and look at your leisure. But here are some of the interesting aspects of the flight evaluation. Now, they don't have on the SAAB-2000 nose wheel steering through the rudder pedals. You have a nose wheel steering knob, you have to depress a button, and you have to maneuver it. There is no center indication on this knob, which was a little bit awkward. And so on takeoff roll, and this was really what we point out as awkward, the captain has to keep his hand on the nose wheel steering and hand on the throttles while the co-pilot controls the ailerons and elevator, putting in any appropriate crosswind component. So here the captain's flying the aircraft. You're going down the runway until 80 knots, and he doesn't have his hand on the yoke. The co-pilot's doing all of that. At 80 knots, now you don't need the nose wheel steering, so you can come off, and the captain can put his hand on the yoke. And this whole thing is reversed upon landing. We pointed out that is just extremely awkward. Now, this aircraft has nice, big, powerful engines with big 6-bladed scimitar props, and it climbs nicely. My initial climb rate, once I accelerated to 180 knots, was 2,800 feet per minute. 4 minutes and 30 seconds after takeoff, we were passing through 10,000 feet, still climbing at 180 knots. We went through 15,000 feet at 6 minutes and 40 seconds with a climb rate of 2,100 feet per minute, and got up to flight level 310, and I hit it basically still indicating 600 feet per minute, and I leveled off at 310 at 17 minutes total elapsed time. Now that's pretty impressive. But like I said, the cruise speed of 0.6 knots and a true airspeed of 305 knots indicated was just not going to make it in the U.S. System. So we take the aircraft up to high altitude. We do a few maneuvers up there, and during this process, we switch out various members through the seat so everybody gets to evaluate various aspects of the aircraft at various different parameters, so we get everybody's opinion in there about handling qualities. And we did, now we want to lose some altitude and get down to the mid-structure, so we did a simulated emergency descent. We go down to 180, and we flew a few steep turns. And we did some timed roll maneuvers, and we found a very respectable 30 degrees per second roll rate, which is nice and decent for an aircraft in this class. Then we did some single engine maneuvering. I got involved in that, and that was quite well handled. I did some stalls at 11,000 feet with 15 degrees of flaps and various other configurations. And the aircraft has a stick pusher, and it activated 12 degrees nose up, 90 knots, and took the yoke right out of my hand, and I found that I could not override the force of it. And now the stick pusher, it's disabled on takeoff below 50 feet, but it's not disabled on landing, and we were a little concerned about that. We were successful in convincing a few other manufacturers to disable the stick pusher on low altitude. So, because at 100 feet, if you get a stick push and it drives the nose down, that is not going to be a survivable situation. But one of the other things we did was we're down at 5,000 feet, and I'm going to simulate a engine failure on takeoff. And the test pilot pulls the fire handle, which fails the engine, and it does an auto feather. But the interesting thing about these scimitar blades that have high twist, it takes it not to what you would call a feather position, but what you'd call a minimum drag position, because since the blades are swept, you can't really get it like I can on my Cessna, perfectly flat like that. You can't assume a full feathered position. And one thing interesting, because of these big blades, the windmilling restart envelope is actually quite small on the aircraft. And if you have an engine failure, the APU automatically starts to assist in a relight if necessary. And of course, the other engine, you now have 110% rated thrust. We noticed that it took about 30 degrees of rudder to control this, bank into the good engine, 5 degrees like you do, just any civilian pilot will do, raise the dead engine, all that stuff. And we came back, and the committee members got to do a bunch of evaluations. I did a simulated engine failure on takeoff right at V2. The test pilot pulled one of the engines to idle, and the aircraft was very controllable. It has a fly-by-wire rudder. It's a little more assisting the pilot there, and because of these very powerful engines, and it was quite a good help in that respect. And now, like I said, I like to bring pilots from other airlines to evaluate the flight performance of the aircraft. And Captain Brian, he flew the airplane, and his comments were that he felt that the power application was more sensitive in the 2000 and the 340, and he also felt that the elevator felt quite heavy in the pattern. But hopefully the PEX system would alleviate those issues. But as I mentioned, mainly because of the exchange rate, this aircraft never made it into the States. I have seen a lot of them in Europe, but in the United States, I have seen extremely few. So it was a good idea. Saab is a great company. They produce great aircraft, and we had a lot of fun visiting with them, evaluating their aircraft. But this is one that just didn't make it economically over here. So I hope you found this enjoyable and informative, and I hope you don't mind the digressions. Thanks for watching.